Lucia stood silently at the edge of the terrace, her hands curled around the warm porcelain of her coffee mug, though the liquid inside had long since gone cold. The sun had barely risen, painting the city skyline with streaks of gold and amber. But her mind was elsewhere, on Alejandro, on Valeria, on the betrayal she had smelled for weeks. She could feel it in the air, the same way one senses a storm approaching, the tension building with each passing second. Alejandro had always been arrogant, his charm a mask over a reckless and selfish heart. But today his arrogance seemed almost palpable, radiating through his messages, his hurried phone calls, the way he avoided her gaze these past days. It started with little things, subtle hints that most would dismiss as coincidence. A faint perfume in his jacket pocket, a hastily deleted text, an unusual detour on his morning route. But Lucia had eyes that saw more than the obvious, instincts sharpened by years of surviving in a world that never gave women power without a fight. She remembered the night she discovered Valeria's name buried in Alejandro's contacts, a smiling face on his phone screen that had sent a chill down her spine. She had felt a surge of anger, yes, but also clarity. She would not be humiliated. She would not be blindsided. By late morning, her suspicions were confirmed. A careless message left open on Alejandro's tablet while he showered spelled it all out. Valeria. A chapel. Saturday. A secret wedding. The audacity made her lips curl into a thin, controlled smile. He had thought she wouldn't notice, that she would remain the docile, patient wife he could manipulate. But patience was her weapon, and strategy her shield. She would not confront him now, not yet. She needed proof, timing, precision. She began her preparations immediately. Her laptop hummed as she reviewed documents she had quietly filed months ago. Every joint asset, every property, every account, all legally binding and fully in her name should the time come. She read through the divorce clauses once more, ensuring no loopholes, no gaps Alejandro could exploit. Her heart thrummed not with fear but with anticipation, the kind that comes before a storm breaks, before justice is served. She imagined Alejandro's smug expression when she revealed everything, the way his confidence would crumble in front of friends, family, and Valeria, who had never considered the depth of Lucia's resolve. Lucia moved through her apartment with silent efficiency, picking out an outfit that would command attention without screaming for it. A dress of deep emerald silk, tailored to perfection, not ostentatious, but undeniably striking. She wanted every eye to be on her, not out of vanity, but to signal that she was the one holding power now. Hair pinned back elegantly, minimal jewelry, but a gaze sharp enough to pierce through Alejandro's facade. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You'll regret this if you interfere." She ignored it. Threats meant little to someone who had spent her life negotiating power in a man's world. Lucia's mind was calm, methodical. She had allies quietly gathering around her. Lawyers, friends who understood the stakes, witnesses who could corroborate everything if Alejandro tried to twist the truth. Every contingency was accounted for, every angle secured. As Saturday approached, the tension grew, each day marked by Alejandro's oblivious confidence. He sent casual texts about the perfect day, about Valeria's happiness, never knowing that the woman he sought to humiliate had already rewritten the rules entirely. Lucia rehearsed in her mind every word, every pause, every reveal, until it felt like a performance of inevitability. She would walk into that chapel not as a scorned wife, but as a master strategist executing a flawless plan. On the morning of the wedding, she left her apartment early, driving past the city streets with the same quiet determination she had displayed every day of her life. Alejandro's arrogance was nearly palpable as she imagined it, his laughter, his self-satisfaction, the delusion that he had outsmarted her. But he had overlooked the one thing that could not be bought, cajoled, or ignored: Lucia's patience and cunning. She arrived at the chapel just moments before the guests, slipping in unnoticed, a shadow among the early arrivals. The floral arrangements, the sparkling lights, the excitement in the air. Every detail was the backdrop to the moment she had been waiting for. Alejandro would see her not as a threat, but as the reckoning he had ignored for far too long. Valeria would see the woman she had underestimated, the one whose empire and mind were far beyond her shallow ambition. And the witnesses, friends, family, strangers, would see the collapse of arrogance at the hands of someone who had been quietly planning, waiting, and watching. Lucia took a deep breath, her hand tightening around the clutch that held the papers, her armor, or her evidence, her victory. Every step she took toward the altar was measured, deliberate, echoing with the sound of inevitability. She was calm, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed: pain, anger, but above all, triumph. The moment Alejandro would realize that the game had changed, that he was no longer in control, was almost within reach. She smiled faintly to herself, knowing that by the end of this day, the power would finally shift, irrevocably, and she would emerge not as a victim, but as a conqueror. And as the doors to the chapel opened, and Alejandro and Valeria laughed, blissfully unaware of what was coming, Lucia stepped forward, the embodiment of patience, strategy, and inevitable justice, ready to claim the life she had fought for, the respect she had been denied, and the ultimate triumph over betrayal. And the chapel buzzed with excitement, the soft murmur of guests mixing with the faint rustle of silk and the delicate scent of roses and lilies hanging in the air. Alejandro, unaware of the storm about to descend upon him, straightened his tie and whispered to Valeria, a smug smile dancing across his face. "Can you believe it, mi amor? Finally, no one can touch us." Valeria's laugh was light, oblivious to the undercurrents she had no idea existed. She had been so sure of this day, so convinced of her power over Alejandro, but the universe had other plans. Lucia lingered in the back, her heels silent against the marble floor, her eyes fixed on the altar. Every detail was etched into her mind: the pristine white cloth, the candles flickering gently, the rows of seats filled with faces that had witnessed her marriage, her life, her trials. Some would be shocked, some sympathetic, but all would see the collapse of arrogance at its peak. She felt a surge of cold satisfaction as she watched Alejandro lean toward Valeria, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a gesture of intimacy that would soon be shattered by the truth he had refused to acknowledge. Her hands gripped the clutch containing the divorce papers, the legal documents that would not only sever their bond but strip Alejandro of the wealth and power he thought he could claim without consequence. She had spent months ensuring that every clause, every signature, every account was airtight. This was more than revenge, it was justice, the kind that left no room for negotiation, no chance for manipulation. She had learned long ago that men like Alejandro only understood consequences when they hit them squarely and publicly. As the officiant began speaking, Lucia stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, her heart pounding with controlled intensity. The room seemed to hold its breath, the chatter fading into silence as her presence became undeniable. Heads turned, whispers ricocheted off the polished walls, and Alejandro's confident smile faltered ever so slightly. He sensed something was off, a ripple in the otherwise perfect day, but he dismissed it at first, believing she would not dare confront him here. But Lucia had dared. She approached the front with measured grace, her eyes locked on Alejandro. He turned fully then, his expression a mix of surprise and confusion, a crack in the mask of arrogance he had worn for years. Lucia, what? He began, but the words faltered on his lips. Valeria's face, too, registered shock, a flash of uncertainty crossing her features as she followed Alejandro's gaze. The room seemed to contract, time slowing, all attention converging on the woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed. Lucia drew a deep breath, the papers in her hand cool and steady. "Alejandro," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade. "I think it's time you understand that nothing in this life is yours to claim without consequence." Her words hung in the air, charged with authority and finality. The guests leaned forward, sensing the drama unfolding, the weight of history and betrayal converging in a single moment. Alejandro tried to mask his growing panic with bravado, stepping toward her. Lucia, this isn't the time, not here," he stammered, his voice betraying the first tremors of fear. "You can't—" "Yes, I can," she interrupted, opening the clutch and spreading the documents across the front pew. The bold letters, the signatures, the clauses, every piece of his life he had assumed he controlled was now evidence of his downfall. The murmurs swelled, the room vibrating with anticipation. Valeria's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips as she realized the magnitude of the revelation. Alejandro's face turned pale, the arrogant facade crumbling under the weight of legality and truth. Lucia's eyes didn't waver from his. "All of it, Alejandro. The house, the accounts, the assets. You thought you could betray me, mock me, humiliate me, and get away with it, but this, she let the word linger, did dripping with inevitability, is justice. This is what happens when arrogance blinds you to the woman standing right in front of you. He tried to argue, to charm, to manipulate, but the room would no longer allow it. Witnesses, family, friends, colleagues looked on with shock and quiet admiration. Alejandro's power, which he had wielded so carelessly, slipped from his hands like sand. He realized, far too late, that he had miscalculated entirely, that the woman he had dismissed as powerless was the one holding every key. Valeria's protestations fell flat against the clarity of the documents and the presence of witnesses who had long suspected Alejandro's duplicity. Every whisper of doubt, every glance of incredulity reinforced Lucia's control over the moment. She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the architect of a spectacular reckoning. The storm that had been brewing for months now unleashed in full force. Alejandro's desperation became visible, the first tremors of panic shaking his composure. Lucia, this isn't fair, he pleaded, voice breaking, his hands gesturing helplessly toward the papers. You can't. Yes, I can, Lucia repeated, her voice unwavering, every syllable resonating with authority. I've ensured that this day, this moment, leaves no room for your lies, your arrogance, or your betrayal. You gambled with me, Alejandro, and lost. The officiant, a quiet observer until now, cleared his throat, addressing the room. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have an unexpected turn of events. I suggest we pause proceedings until matters are settled. The words, calm yet firm, only added to the humiliation Alejandro now faced. The whispers grew louder, the energy of the room charged with disbelief, fascination, and the satisfaction of witnessing justice unfold. Lucia's heart remained steady, her mind clear. She had envisioned this moment countless times, every word, every movement, every reveal. And now, as Alejandro's face paled, as Valeria's hope dissolved into horror, she realized the finality of her triumph. She had not just confronted betrayal, she had dismantled it, piece by piece, with precision, patience, and unwavering resolve. The guests began to gather around, offering quiet congratulations and whispers of awe at her courage and intellect. Alejandro, once the center of power and charm, now found himself alone, stripped of the facade, confronted with the reality of his choices. On Valeria's attempts at consolation faltered under the weight of the evidence, leaving her as powerless as Alejandro. Lucia straightened, the papers still firmly in hand, a symbol of the control she had regained and the victory she had claimed. The air was thick with tension, but also with an undeniable sense of justice fulfilled. Today, the world had witnessed the collapse of arrogance at the hands of patience, strategy, and intelligence. And Lucia, as she looked around at the faces of those who had doubted her, smiled faintly, knowing that the reckoning she had long planned had arrived, and it was absolute. The whispers had barely settled when the reality of the situation hit Alejandro with the force of a hammer. He stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The chapel, once a place of celebration, they had transformed into a stage for his humiliation, and Lucia was the conductor of the symphony. Valeria clutched at his arm, her previous confidence shattered, the smile that had promised him a future together now twisted into panic and disbelief. Lucia took a slow step forward, the divorce papers still in her hand, crisp and decisive. Every movement radiated control, a stark contrast to Alejandro's frantic energy. He tried to recover, tried to speak, but words failed him. The air itself seemed to press down, heavy with judgment, and the collective awareness of those who had witnessed his arrogance and betrayal. Lucia, you can't, he began, but she cut him off with a calm, cutting glance. Yes, I can, she said firmly, her voice slicing through the tension. You've underestimated me for years. You thought betrayal, manipulation, how an arrogance would protect you. But here we are, Alejandro. The truth always finds its stage. The guests leaned in, sensing the drama reaching its zenith. Alejandro's mouth opened and closed, attempting a charm, a justification, a plea. Anything to salvage what remained of his pride. But the reality was undeniable. Every asset, every claim he thought was untouchable, every advantage he had wielded with such arrogance was now firmly in her hands. The papers were more than ink on parchment. They were the embodiment of justice, meticulously prepared, leaving him no escape. Valeria's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for anyone who might back her up, but the reality was clear. The crowd, once potential spectators to their triumph, now became witnesses to their downfall. Every whisper, every gaze, was a silent condemnation. Alejandro's control, the power he had exercised over so many, dissolved in an instant under the weight of meticulous planning and unwavering resolve. Lucia moved closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor with purposeful cadence. She didn't need to shout. Her presence, her focus, was enough to command the room. The house, the accounts, every asset. They are mine, she said, her eyes locking with Alejandro's. You gambled with my life, my dignity, my trust. And now you'll see what happens when someone underestimated fights back with intelligence, patience, and precision. Alejandro staggered, his composure finally fracturing completely. You can't. You're ruining everything, he spat, desperation lacing his voice. But no one listened. Valeria's protests had turned into silent, wide-eyed horror as she realized that she, too, had been caught in a game far bigger than she had anticipated. Lucia's hand extended, placing the papers on the altar where all could see. This is not about vengeance alone, she said, her voice calm but resolute. It's about justice. Every betrayal has a consequence. Every lie has an ending. And today, that ending is here. The officiant stepped back, clearing his throat and observing the growing murmurs among the guests. Alejandro's confident posture, once so assured, now crumpled. He realized the stakes, the humiliation, and the legal and social fallout that awaited him. There was no charm, no excuse, no manipulation left to save him. Lucia's eyes swept across the room, taking in familiar faces, allies, friends, family, all witnesses to the reckoning. She had not just reclaimed her life, but she had done so in a way that ensured the public acknowledgement of justice. Alejandro's arrogance had been his undoing, and Valeria's complicity only hastened their shared downfall. Alejandro sank into a chair near the back, his face pale, the first real fear he had felt in years coursing through him. Valeria's hand trembled as she reached for him, but he pulled back instinctively, now fully aware of the chasm that separated them. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, and betrayed now held all the cards, and the realization was suffocating. Lucia turned, addressing the room, her voice carrying a mix of authority and triumph. Let this be a lesson, not just to Alejandro and Valeria, but to everyone who believes that deception and arrogance go unpunished. I have lived through betrayal, but I will not be broken. I have reclaimed what is mine. Oh, and justice has been served in the fullest measure. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, whispers of admiration and astonishment filling the air. Alejandro's attempts at protest were drowned out by the collective acknowledgement of Lucia's victory. Valeria's face, once smug and confident, now mirrored fear and regret, her plans unraveling before her eyes. Alejandro rose shakily, attempting one last confrontation. Lucia, this isn't over, he hissed. But the conviction behind his words sounded hollow, brittle. She simply met his gaze, unwavering, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It is over, she said softly, almost kindly but with an undeniable finality. For both of you. You gambled on my weakness, my silence, my compliance. You lost. And now the world has seen it. The guests began to disperse, and murmuring their amazement and respect for Lucia's strategic brilliance. Alejandro and Valeria were left standing, stripped of pride, of power, and of any sense of security. Every plan they had counted on to secure a future together had collapsed, leaving only shame, regret, and the unshakable presence of the woman they had underestimated. Lucia gathered her papers, tucking them neatly back into her clutch, her steps deliberate and composed as she exited the chapel. She didn't rush. There was no need. Every eye followed her, every whisper chronicling her triumph. Alejandro's secrets, his manipulation, his lies, they were all exposed, and the consequences were immediate and undeniable. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the evening. Lucia paused, allowing herself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of the victory she had so meticulously earned. Alejandro and Valeria would face legal and social repercussions, yes, but more than that, they would carry the mark of humiliation, the memory of being bested by a woman they had so cavalierly dismissed. Lucia smiled faintly, her heart steady, her mind clear. She had endured, she had planned, and she had executed with precision. Justice had been served, and this time there would be no reprieve. Alejandro and Valeria's world had crumbled, and in its place, she stood resolute, triumphant, and finally free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the chapel steps, Lucia walked away, her head held high. The whispers of admiration followed her, but more importantly, the quiet, undeniable truth had been established. She was unstoppable, and no betrayal, and no arrogance, no deceit could ever take that from her again.